To follow up the good news or the optimistic projections about renewable energy and energy efficiencies, we have to maybe put some caveats here. This is a nice article that just came out in Nature that raises issues about the kind of geopolitical reorganization, energy markets, and various coordinations between countries, Russia and China, Portugal, Spain, and France, and what US is doing in terms of helping Europe with its energy crisis and so on. So the caveats have to basically look at various things like how energy prices are affecting the transitions, where the optimistic view is that Europe has accelerated the transition to renewables because of the energy crisis created by Russian invasion of Ukraine. But there are also issues about how this is affecting developing countries or the global south. And then there are issues about how this will begin to play out in the coming years, because the war shows no end, no signs of ending anytime soon, getting into some kind of a stalemate which could drag on, like the Syrian war, which we don't talk about anymore, even though there is not exactly peace there yet. Plus the pipelines, for example, in the Mediterranean, which Spain, Portugal and France want to use for dealing with each other's gas supply, and whether that's cost effective. And Russia wants to build a pipeline into China through Mongolia. It's not clear how the sanctions and other issues will affect this, or how the war will end, or when it will end, and how that will affect the China-Russia coalition and so on. So let's start looking at oil and gas reshuffle. Deliveries of crude oil and natural gas from Russia to the European Union and the United Kingdom slumped in 2022 as a result of Russia's invasion of Ukraine. So there was a sanction put on Russia about selling oil, but then Russia turned around and turned off the gas supplies, and then Norway and US have been supplying the gas to some extent to tide over the crisis, or we don't know how long this will go on. Russian crude oil exports from its western ports in October 21 and October 22, EU was receiving 7 million tons, or 65% of the exports, and US, UK, Japan and Canada together formed 12%, non-EU, non-G7 formed 13%, and undetermined was 10%. These are rounded off, so they don't necessarily add up to 100%. The non-G7 excludes Canada, France, Germany, Italy, Japan, UK and US, and the percentages here, as we said, don't add up. In October 2022, the scenario changed. EU dropped to 35% from 65% in terms of crude oil recipients from Russian exports. Non-GU, non-G7 jumped to 15%, and undetermined jumped to 13%, which obviously includes illegal supplies to beat the sanctions and so on. And then there are some deals made with India buying a lot of it. I'm sure Russia, Iran and so on, or Iran may not have to buy, but Iran may be using this opportunity to tamper with the market, free market as well. If you look at EU and UK natural gas imports by source, this is natural gas is playing a strange role because the transition is now being kind of under the Paris Agreement, COP27. They are trying to slide in natural gas as a low emission fossil fuel. So that's a tricky thing, because decarbonizing and eliminating all fossil fuels is then getting little slide back saying low emission fossil fuels like natural gas. This is of course to make room for EU and the global north to burn natural gas while the transition is delayed, let's say because of the Russian invasion of Ukraine. If you look at October 21 versus October 22, you can see that Russia provided 33%, of the supply, and you had Norway supplying 36%, and there was some LNG or liquefied natural gas. So to supply natural gas you need a pipeline, of course, and you can transport it by cooling it and producing liquid, which obviously takes much less space than gas, but gas can flow through pipes if there is direct pipeline, but if you want to ship, then you have to liquefy it. And then there is Algeria and others. So the connections of EU with African countries like Namibia, Nigeria, Algeria, I think, are increasing because of this Russian issue. So you can see that Russian imports dropped from 33% in October 21 to 8% in 22 October. Norway jumped from 36 to 40%, and liquefied natural gas jumped from 19% to 38%, twice the amount. Most of this, of course, coming from US, and Algeria's contribution remains almost the same, and others remain almost the same as well. So you can see that there is geopolitical realignment going on, and how this will play out in 2023 has to be watched for carefully. And the accelerated or other ways that investments in renewables are being affected by the energy crisis includes details such as China's dominance of the solar panels. We looked at this in the previous podcast as well. So China dominates the minerals needed, elements needed for this, like cobalt and nickel, as well as manufacturing. And then should Europe and US try to start manufacturing solar panels themselves to counteract China's dominance and potential geopolitical controls that can work against them, or should they use this opportunity to leapfrog and go into something better than what China is supplying? So the supply chain logistics from green technologies is going to be something that has to be watched out for in general, also the general industrial supplies. And there are issues of reshoring. Many countries, including US, are considering reshoring, which means the industries that were exported out because of cheap labor or reducing their own air quality issues and water quality issues now are being thought of having to be brought back into the country to avoid these impacts of energy crisis and other geopolitical issues. Keeping that in mind, ultimately the nature of the decarbonization transition is a political choice. Does the world tackle the transition as a global commons challenge, requiring joint efforts from development banks, financial institutions, and clubs of governments from G7 to the G20? These clubs are basically trying to monitor carbon that's embedded or embodied in things that are being exported or imported, and they want to impose things like carbon tax at the borders and so on and so forth, which is yet to play out completely, but EU has already raised some flags about it. So that will be part of the joint effort to transition everybody as a global commons challenge. Or the transition can also, decarbonization can also be done as a green race, accepting winners and losers and the consequences, including poorer prospects for countries that fail to attract clean capital. So let's say India or some African country wants to grow in its green technology expertise, manufacturing, research, etc. Where will it get the funding? This is going to be an issue if it's going to be a green race. Researchers need to supply evidence to help decision makers, and of course there will be winners and losers in many ways in this, because if the global south falls behind in the transition, then everybody is going to pay a price in terms of exceeding the global warming targets. Little is known about the future supply chain for green technologies as well. Production and transportation costs for green hydrogen need to be worked out. Ammonia is a promising way to transport such fuel over long distances, but the commercial prospects of this remain in question. So these are the things to watch out for as well. In terms of the energy cost hikes, soaring prices for natural gas, electricity and oil have forced governments to subsidize consumers and firms in 2022. So the Russian invasion created lots of issues, especially UK and Germany. They started sliding back on their climate promises and started cranking up some coal power plants or burning coal for winter heating, for example. And the government stepped in and started paying out doles to deal with this crisis much more than needed. They were proactive handout subsidies for dealing with energy bills and so on. So price change in relative to January 2021 in terms of percentages, you can see that this go up to 1500%. That's not a small number. Prices of natural gas, electricity and oil in Europe, energy prices rocketed from mid-2021 as Russia reduced its supply. So there is the natural gas tidal transfer facility, which is the Dutch virtual trading platform for natural gas. So gas prices peaked as Gazprom announced a halt of its Nord Stream flows. So there have been some issues of pipelines being damaged, and we don't know who exactly did that, etc. Gazprom, of course, is the Russian one. Electricity, German based, so this is going from 21 into 22 and how things are playing out. And oil. So oil has remained relatively flat, even though it went up just a little. Oil always reacts very quickly to prices, market forces, etc. And there have been bumps along the way for electricity in terms of German base load, in terms of demand for heating, etc. and how closely it's correlated with natural gas in terms of the tidal transfer facility you can see happening here. Okay, so obviously the markets are being affected greatly by the energy crisis. Government interventions to reduce energy bills since September 2021. Governments in Europe have earmarked and allocated more than 700 billion euros or 743 US dollars in energy subsidies. Percentage of gross domestic product in terms of the subsidies, Malta at 7.7%, Germany at 7.4%. These are not necessarily consistent with climate actions, by the way. If you want climate actions and want to stick to reducing emissions, you also want to incentivize reducing fossil fuel consumptions and not just subsidize energy bills, right? So on down here, Sweden at 0.3% and Denmark is at 2%. So this has obviously cast a shadow in terms of what the global north can dictate to the global south, or what kind of pressure they can put on global south in reducing coal and other fossil fuel dependencies and new investments even into fossil fuel based infrastructure and so on. Funding allocated in terms of euros, it's not small at all. So 1.1 billion euros for Malta. Germany is 264.2. So you can see that percentage of gross domestic product doesn't necessarily tell you how much money it is. Malta shows up as the top one in terms of percentage of gross domestic GDP, but in terms of real amount it's quite small. So 1.1 billion euros. This is 264.2 billion euros, and here is UK at 97, France at 71.6, Denmark at 6.8, and Sweden at 1.6. So we are all in this, and treating this as a transition based on global commons is obviously going to be best for humanity, but one cannot avoid the green technology race, which is already happening in terms of various technologies, including the CCUS or DAC, direct air capture, and carbon capture technologies, and so on. So this will play out, but keep your eye on the energy crisis playing out into 2023 as we wind up 2022, and Russian war is still on with no sign of ending anytime soon. Okay.